Hey up me ducks, just waiting for the bongs to officially kick off Tarathon 2020. Are we ready? I hope you can hear them. There we go. It's 10 a.m. in the UK and it is the start of Tarathon 2020, our third Tarathon. There's 100 people here already before going live, which is just amazing. I'd love to be able to go through every single person and say hello to you all individually, but I'm mindful that we've got 1 hour, and doing that would of course take up that whole hour, and that's not what you'd want. So just a collective hello and welcome. As I said, you can hear the bongs. You will hear these same bongs at 10 a.m. tomorrow, which will mark the end of Tarathon 2020. I have to say as well, I'm just so impressed by the people who have committed to doing 24 hours. Not that you have to, and there is no pressure on anybody to do that. But I just saw people saying, you know, it's Saturday night here. Jonathan's who's in Hawaii. It's 11 o'clock Saturday night. It is Sunday night for people who are over in Australia. We're covering all different countries and continents, and it's just great to see everybody here. So, welcome, enjoy. I am so impressed by the coverage and breadth of knowledge that is going to be shared between all these amazing channels over the next 24 hours. I've got my journal at the ready. I'm going to be taking lots of copious amounts of notes. I've got plenty of coffee to get me through. So, firstly, before I start talking about my subject, I want to just go through, as I said I would, and I always do at the beginning of Tarathon, what the lineup is. There has been one change, so you might need to grab a pen just to make a note of the change. And just kind of go through what to expect if it's your first time here. And I have seen people saying that it's their first Tarathon. So yeah, I'll just go through what the running order is. So you will see, if you look at my description below, the next channel that is following me. Our intention is to have a 24-hour coverage of tarot information ending this time tomorrow. So each channel that does their subject, their hour at their allotted time, will link the next channel that's going to follow them. So it makes it really easy for you to just click on to the next channel. When this broadcast ends, it will take you to Kasia over at Tarot Map, and then the same with Kasia, who will link Christine and Celeste, etc. And that's how we'll go through. Itineraries have been plastered everywhere, so if you don't want to, or you can't manage full 24 hours, and there's certain subjects you want to just dip in and out of, then look for the itinerary, which are listed in the Hermit's Cave, on most of the channels that are taking part on YouTube, or even my community tab, which has listed everybody's channel links. So you can, you know, subscribe to those channels and you'll get the notifications if you switch them on for the live broadcasts. Should YouTube crash? It's not going to. It's not going to, is it? But it did last year. We was 9 hours into Tarathon last year and the whole of YouTube globally crashed. Then we will quickly transfer it over to Facebook, which will be in the Hermit's Cave. So if you're not a member yet of the Hermit's Cave Facebook group, can I suggest that you just do a quick request to join and we will let you in. And therefore we will be able to just switch quickly over, because there was it took a bit of time last year because we weren't expecting it and we don't want to be caught out this year. Okay, so the lineup. 10 a.m. This are all UK times, is myself, and I'm going to be talking in a few minutes about Pixie, the irrepressible Pixie, Pamela Coleman-Smith, who I just adore. So I'm going to be talking about her, and I've just seen I've not lit my incense, and I like to have my incense lit.
Good morning. This is an alarm test from the control.
Great, an alarm test.
The system is being tested.
So they're going to test the alarms. I think that's happened once in 15 years that I've lived here. And they're going to test it right when I'm going live for Tarathon. Oh well, these things happen. It's live. Yeah, and the RWS Tarot, and why, you know, she is such a pivotal person within the tarot community, and for what she's done for tarot in general. So I'll be talking a little bit about that. Kick it off with a bang. Yeah. We might hear a deafening alarm soon, but we'll just plow on through. Following me, Kasia over at Tarot Map, and she's going to be talking about being a intuitive tarot reader. Christine and Celeste is going to be showing her photographic decks and talking about photographic decks. At 1 o'clock, we have our Becca. Becca talks in tarot through the looking glass. 2 o'clock, Joe the Tarot Guy. It's his first year this year, so let's give him a lot of love and support. He's going to be talking about the basics of tarot, and including the channel, deck, and tech. Then at 3 p.m, again, remember these are all UK times. You will need to use Google to work out time zones. Little Zen Crone, our Jilly, will be talking about Jung, tarot, and shadow work, which I'm really looking forward to. 4 p.m. is Kelly over at The Truth in Story, and she's going to be talking about reading tarot ghost cards, which, yeah, I'm really excited about that. And when I saw Kelly's subject, I was like, that's something quite different for Kelly. So, really excited. Then we have Roman Biscotti, our Tangi, who's going to be talking about fun tarot and oracle decks. And that'll be a hoot. And she's promised me she won't break YouTube this year, which it was on Tangi's channel last year where it crashed. Then we have the lovely Maha from Maha's Treasure Box, who's going to be talking about tarot and astrology. Following Maha is Lavender Moon, who's going to be talking about numerology and unlocking the secret code. And I'm really into numerology, particularly around reading the pips and the minors. So I'm excited for that. Then at 7 p.m, we have Tara from Kittens, Weights and Tarot. And she's going to be talking about tarot and your soul contract. We just crossed 200 subscribers, 200 viewers as well. So welcome to everybody. It's great to see such an amazing turnout for the time of day in other parts of the world other than the UK. At 8 p.m. tonight, we're going to be going to Anna Teresa from the channel Ladybird by Teresa. And she's going to be talking about the art of tarot. 9 p.m, closing the first 12-hour section, we've got Jen from Jen's Balanced Tarot, and she's going to be talking about finding balance within tarot. And I've seen some of the stuff that she's got coming up, and I'm really excited for it. Then we go into the second half, and this is where I start drinking lots of caffeine. 10 p.m, we have Moon Baby, so our Brant. More decks, more options, and he's going to be talking about historic decks as well as affordable decks and things like that. And then at 11 o'clock, we have Crossed Paths, which is our Lucian and Dave, and they're going to be talking about Tarot Dare to Compare. And then we have a change. So at midnight UK time, it was Mama Squirrel's Witchy Wisdom. But unfortunately, Jen got in touch last night, and due to personal reasons, she's not able to take part this year. So sending lots of love to Jen. She's okay, but she's got personal reasons that she can't take part. So what I'm going to say is, if you're watching Crossed Paths the hour before, there will be a link in there to a brand new channel. Okay? Tarathon is going to be giving birth to a brand new channel, and I'm not going to say who it is, but you want to be there. And there's going to be a lovely segment, which is going to be quite different, that you'll be able to actively get involved in. Okay, then 1 a.m, Mitchell Osborne reading tarot in layers. 2 a.m, Jennifer Ball's Witch House. She's going to be doing Kickstarter and Indigo Revisited. The chat is just scrolling. I'm seeing it out the corner of my eye. It's scrolling so fast, but it's just wonderful. And if you are somebody who normally sits and watches and doesn't feel confident to join in, please can I ask that you do, because the one thing about Tarathon is that sense of community. And whether you're a content creator or you're here in the chat supporting, some real friendships and connections are made over the next 24 hours. So do speak up, say hello to people, say where you are, and join in the conversation. Okay, 3 a.m. Our Donna from Ozark Oracle, Tarot and the Sixth Sense. 4 a.m. we have Stella Rain Dancer. That's the lovely Jess who I interviewed on my channel a few weeks ago. And she's going to be talking about Tarot for Devotion. 5 a.m. is Sun Willow Studios and Trash to Treasure deck modifications. So that's going to be really interesting. And there are a few of us in the community who are into our deck modifications. And a few people are also quite nervous about that. So there'll be some good tips there. 6 a.m. we have Tarodactyl. I love that channel name, Tarodactyl. And Speed Reading the Tarot. And 7 a.m. we go over to Australia, which will be there Monday evening. Seems really strange that this will still be happening Monday evening in some parts of the world while it's still Sunday morning here. But the lovely Jen, who we affectionately call Hen, from Science to Soul Tarot with Jen, and she's going to be talking about healing with the tarot. So it's called Heal with the Tarot. And then staying in Australia, although a different part of Australia, at 8 a.m, Musings by Marsha, and she's going to be talking about weaving tarot mages integrators way. So that just sounds it just sounds really interesting, so I'm looking forward to that. Then if you come back here for 9 o'clock, I'll be doing the summary and close, but there will be something else added to that. So a nice little bonus to end Tarathon with. So I'm not going to say too much, but there will be a giveaway, but a nice little bonus for rounding up the 24-hour period. So I think that's a really great lineup, and I'm really, really excited about this year's Tarathon, and I hope you are too. So I hope you've got coffee and you've got supplies and you've perhaps got a journal and a pen or whatever. Make sure your bank balances are topped up if you're seeing all these tarot decks. I'll put myself on a ban though. I'm not going to be tempted by that. Okay, so I think I've covered everything I want to say about Tarathon, other than just to say it's just great that this is our 3rd year and it's growing year on year. And I'm so pleased about the content that we've been able to put together. And if you're up for the 24-hour challenge, let us know in every comment that you go to, every channel you go to, let us know in the comments. I'm still here. That's what we've been doing each year and supporting each other to keep going. All right, so it is no surprise to a lot of people who have watched my channel, whether it's very recently that you've been subscribed or you've been here right from the start, some 3.5 years ago, that I am an RWS guy. I absolutely love the RWS Tarot, and I have a particular fondness for Pamela Coleman-Smith, for Pixie. You know, those of you who don't know, I have her signature. If you can see that there, it's hard to get your arm into those positions in it, but her famous signature is tattooed onto my arm, which I've had for a few months now. And that is because, you know, she has really helped to transform my life. If it wasn't for her and her artwork, in particular the work that she describes as a huge job for very little money, I don't think I would have embraced the tarot as much as I actually do. But who is the woman behind the RWS deck? There's lots of mysteries around her, and even now, after studying and researching, there are still a lot of mysteries around her, like where she's buried because of records that were destroyed in fires, whether she was a person of colour, whether she was a member of the LGBT plus community. These are things that have been speculated on, and I will touch upon them, but there is still a lot of mystery around the enigma that is Pixie. Where did she get her nickname Pixie? So I will talk about that and the information that I've been able to get. Now, a lot of it has been online research, but I do want to credit as well this incredible book, which is Pamela Coleman Smith, The Untold Story. It is by Stuart Kaplan, but it's also got contributions from Mary Kay Greer, Elizabeth Foley O'Connor, Melinda Boyd Parsons. And this is an incredible book. But just this information here relates to Pamela's life story. The rest of it is all of her works. So her artwork and where they've appeared and things like that. Because of copyright reasons, I'm obviously not going to read from the book or show a lot of images from the book. So the information I've got, I just wanted to mention that book. And it comes in different sizes and formats. It's one I've had for a while and I've dipped in and out of, but it's really fantastic, a fantastic resource. And I can't recommend it enough to anybody who wants to know more about Pixie. So, this incredible woman has only in the last 10 years or so has really had the recognition that she deserves. It wasn't until the Centennial, this is the borderless edition, the Centennial deck, that her name appeared first. It was always referred to as the Rider-Waite Tarot. Rider being the publisher and, you know, Waite being Arthur Edward Waite. But it's so typical, you know, even today, we've still got a long way to go. Artists fail to have their artwork recognised, their talents recognised in the same prominence as the people who even write the little white books or the accompanying guidebooks. And that needs to change. And Pixie was somebody who really championed change. So, you know, if we think about the fact that we've finally given her the acknowledgement she deserves, it's also very sad to think that that's probably 60 years too late for her. But we can at least, you know, recognise her achievements and give her the credit that it's due. This is a deck that is deemed and credited to be the world's most favourite tarot deck, the world's most popular tarot deck, and her artwork is so iconic and so ingrained in many of us within the community that she deserves that accolade. And even though it's quite a substantial departure from tarot decks that we may have known in the past, like the Solar Busca, the Sforza decks, even Marseille decks that came before it, it's a substantial departure because of how Pixie's vision, and she was given autonomy over the minors more so than the majors, although the jury is still out as to how much autonomy she was given. She was certainly directed more for the minors by Arthur Edward Waite than she was, for the majors than she was for the minors, and she really was able to give her those beautiful scenic references for what was originally Pip decks. She did kind of take inspiration from the Solar Busca deck as well, which we'll talk about in a little while. But this was one of the first tarot decks of its kind to have ever been kind of available to the layperson, really. So I want to throw out a question that I'm going to come back to at the end, depending on time. And I want to ask, and please, if you want to put it now and have a discussion, then do. But I want to revisit it at the end and have this discussion too. But I want to plant the seed. So irrespective of how you might personally feel of the RWS Tarot, why do you feel that the RWS in particular is the most popular? Why is it, you know, the most popular and well-loved tarot deck of all time? So just be thinking about that as we go through. So before we look at the RWS tarot deck, and we are going to have a look at it, let's take a closer look at Pixie, Pamela Coleman Smith. And I've got my little prompt cards. If you see me keep looking down, it's because I've got all of these to refer to, because I don't want to miss anything out. I feel a huge amount of responsibility to Pixie and her memory and her legacy to not give her credit for something or not to minimize anything that she did. So she was born in 1878. She was born in London, actually in a place called Pimlico. For those people who are in the UK or London, then you will be aware of that area. She was born to American parents. Now, it's often talked about Pixie being mixed race. There is no evidence to support that, other than the fact that there were 3 pieces of writings written, letters and things, that were written about her around the time of people who had met her. But actually those writings that do appear in the book weren't very flattering and weren't, is not what I'm comfortable to read out. And one of them was a letter which later went into a memoir that was written in 1923. And it was called Changes and Chances by Henry Wood Neverson. And he supposed that that was the case, that she had dual heritage. However, there is no written record to support that. She was really... the way people spoke about Pixie was in one of 2 ways, really. She was often seen as quite mischievous, quite gregarious, fun-loving. Impish was one word that was used to describe her. But, you know, there were some articles that was quite defamatory as well, and quite rude and hurtful, which isn't surprising, really, because here was a brave, strong woman who was trying to make it very much in a male-dominated area, particularly when she started to work in the areas of publishing. But she was also referred to as being more animal than human, which was just terrible, you know. But it was kind of saying that she was very courageous, she was very gutsy, and yeah, there's just some really unpleasant accounts written about her. But do you know what she was? She was an artist. She was a poet, a folklorist, an editor, a publisher, a costume designer, and also a theatre stage designer. And she's just an inspiration to many. She also was somebody who really fought the cause for women, particularly in the areas of publishing, and did such a lot and changed a lot of attitudes. And I will come on to that. So going back to her early life, it isn't clear why the family settled in England. We don't really know why that was. Originally, of course, she was from the States, and an area called Brooklyn Heights in Ohio. That's where her parents were from. Her father was called Charles Edward Smith, and he was 24 when Pamela was born. Her mother was Corinne Coleman, so she kept both names. And also her full name is Pamela Corinne Coleman Smith. So she's took her mum's full name and her dad's name of Smith. Her mother, when she married, sorry, I said it wrong. He was 24 when he married, not when Pamela was born. Her mother was 34, so 10 years older than Pamela's father when they married. And actually, she was 42 when Pamela was born. And at the time, when you think about this being, you know, 1876, a 42-year-old, 1878, sorry, a 42-year-old having a child back then was considered quite a risk. And they married in 1870. Both parents were very prominent figures, and they were quite affluent as well. And when they moved to London, they moved to Belgravia Road, which, you know, is very prominent in Pimlico, and that's near to the Victoria station. 3 years after Pixie was born, I'm going to refer to her as Pixie now because it just feels more comfortable for me to refer to her in that way. The family moved north in England up to Manchester because her father took a job as a upholsterer and a manufacturer of upholstery. And then, so that was at the age of 3, when she was 10, they moved to Jamaica because her father became an auditor of a West Indian improvement company. So they spent a few years in Jamaica. And it was during this time, really, that Pixie really learnt a lot about the religions and the cultures that would shape the rest of her life, particularly when it came to her stage performances that she did, the one-woman stage performances, and her book, the Anansi Tales and things like that. So it was a real formative time of her life. 5 years after that, which was in 1893, Pamela Pixie, at the age of 15, went to Brooklyn and she studied art at the Pratt Institute. So she left Jamaica, went back to Brooklyn and studied there. She studied teaching and illustration. And it was at that school that she got a lot of tutorage, particularly around some of her designs, in terms of her art style really came into prominence, and a lot of the images that we see in the RWS Tarot were influenced at that time, particularly like the Japanese style and the flat images. So at Pratt, Pixie studied drawing, composition and painting, and was widely regarded in their press as well. They had, you know, newspapers, magazines as part of that institute. She was widely regarded as a child prodigy, which is just incredible. She was the first ever student to have articles printed about her, and that appeared in the Pratt Institute Monthly, which is really strange to think that here's an institute, an art college, printing things, but don't, you know, give any space to their learners, we would just wouldn't have that today, would we? You know, all of our kind of college, school or university literature and publications give credit to the learners, but she was the first. Despite all this, she did not finish with the degree that she went to get. So she left there without a degree, and she was quite rebellious. Her character was really starting to form. She was rebellious. She fought against systems, and she ended her connection with the Institute just 2 years later. And as I said, without obtaining that degree. Pixie's resolve was to always do things her way, and that was something that she was very well known for. She didn't follow the crowds. She always swam against the current, and it was her hallmark by people who knew her at the time that part of her traits, part of her personality was that she would do things her own way. She was, however, influenced by one of the professors at the Pratt Institute, whose name was Arthur Wesley Dow, and he taught colour and tone in particular to Pixie, as well as shape and line work. And this led to an understanding of symbolism for Pixie. So he was very influential for her while she was there. She studied Japanese art, and I think you can see that actually in a lot of her images, not just in her tarot images, but in her children's book illustrations and things like that. She liked to replicate Japanese art in terms of their flat shapes and bright colours, and also the subjects being in action shots. I've got one. I've just pulled the first one, you know, just to give an idea of what I'm talking about. Yeah, so we're already seeing that sort of style coming forward. So through Tao, she reportedly became aware of the concept of synesthesia. And if you're not aware of what that is where you can hear things triggered by a different sense, or see things triggered by a different sense. So one sense triggers another. And she said at the time that learning through Tao about the concept of synesthesia had given an understanding and meaning to her lifelong experiences. So this was something that she was obviously born with. So for Pixie in particular, this was sound to colour. She was able to visualise colours and form whilst listening to particular pieces of music. And then when she heard those particular pieces of music, seeing colour and form, she was able to create these into pieces of art. And isn't that an incredible gift to have? You know, and I've always found it so interesting to read and look into synesthesia. So while she was at the Pratt Institute, and as I say, she was only there for 2 years, her mother passed away. Pixie was just 15 when she was there studying, and that was quite a blow to her, but she continued with her studies at the time. In 1889, so a further 3 years after her mother's death, 1889, 3 years after her mother's death, her father died, but just before that, in 1889, Pixie and her father relocated to New York, Manhattan, so after she left the Pratt Institute. And then she decided with real resolve to start a career as a professional artist, and it really began to take shape. She began to become really established as a professional artist. She completed many drawings for theatre productions like The Tempest, Macbeth, Taming of the Shrew, and yeah, really started to take off. Also in 1899, after illustrating works for Yeats, she published the Anansi stories, which was around the retelling of Jamaican folk tales, which she'd picked up during her time in Jamaica. She later expanded those stories, so much later, by adding other stories to it, so a further 20 for her own book, which became a collection. I think it's fair to say as well, at this time, the setting for Pixie's stories, how we doing for time, we're doing okay, is that they were distinctively Jamaican. And there were several references to the practice of the Obi. It's spelled O-B-E-A-H. And the term refers to the magical and religious practices popular within the African Caribbean, notably Jamaica, but they were outlawed by the British imperial rule, which is just sickening, isn't it? So yeah, her stories, the Anansi stories, were very much around the Caribbean and around Jamaican folklore, as well as the magical practices as well, which I think helped her in later years. She had other publications like The Golden Vanity, The Green Bed, and these tales really reflect her growing interest in folk tales and folk culture. And these were released as well, which was quite something for its time, in high quality cloth bound publications. So As well as the success or the start of the success of the Anansi stories, other publications that were also becoming quite prominent at the time was In the Chimney Corners, and these books started to get for the first time, an international presence. And there was reviews appearing in Irish press, the English press, and American newspapers as well. So she really started within those first 3 years of leaving the Pratt Institute to start to make a name for herself. Later in 1889, 3 years after her mother's death, her father died. And this meant that not only was Pixie without parents by the age of 21, but it was absolutely crushing for her, because she was very close to her father, and in particular after leaving the Pratt Institute and going to the States with him, they had become very, very close and had a very tight bond. And she was, of course, devastated by the death of her father. It was reported at the time that the death of her father was taken as a very severe bereavement for her. And he was just 53. So, you know, it was, and if he was 10 years younger, that would be 7 years, so mum would have been 60. It was at this time of her father's death that she developed a friendship with Ellen Terry, who was an actor. And Pamela wrote a short letter to her cousin declining a Christmas invitation, which was shortly after her father's death. Her cousin was called Mary Reed, and she declined the invitation, saying that she developed a close friendship with Ellen Terry, and she referred to her as E.T., and she used the term a dear, D-E-A-R. And it was at that point that she signed the letter Pixie and said that this was a nickname that Ellen Terry had given to her. And it was a term of endearment. So that was the first time that we saw Pixie, you know, using that as a kind of a sign off in letters. Also, E.T., Ellen Terry, at the time, wrote her letter to her son, and she says in this letter that she was so impressed by Pamela, and in particular her work ethic, and described her as a funny little creature, but their friendship really deepened. And Pixie was also known to perform in stage productions that she was in, such as The Merchant of Venice and The Bells, but very minor acting parts like Person in the Crowd, etc. That brings us to the turn of the century, so 1900, and Pixie's involvement in the theatre continued, where she then began working on costumes. Remember, this is a creative, this is an artist, and she really felt at home in creating some wonderful costumes for people. She also, because she was an illustrator, worked on souvenir brochures and things for a theatre production, so she did the illustrations for them. So she was very involved in the theatre world, both by performing as extras, as you might call them now, small parts, creating costumes, and also illustrating of booklets. She also then in later years went into set design as well, so really, you know, built her craft. Pixie also wrote to her cousin saying that she was going home with Miss Terry. And isn't it lovely? And she was talking about home being England. So yeah, she was returning back from New York to the UK. So Pixie set sail from New York on the 19th of May, 1900. And on board that ship was Ellen Terry, Sir Henry Irving, and also Bram Stoker, who reportedly was friends. Bram Stoker was also friends of Pixie's parents. A Upon returning, friendships were formed on that boat. But upon returning to England, she quickly became very good friends with what was deemed as the Bohemian circle, and she would often throw extravagant parties for people who were into arts and crafts and the theatre, writers, poets, and that sort of thing. She continued to work on publications and magazines as an illustrator and designing dresses and costumes for theatre productions as well, back in the UK. In 1901, Pixie moved into a flat in South Kensington, which I'm not sure what South Kensington was like in 1901, but it was certainly a very affluent area today. And later rented the flat next door to her, which became her studio. So she actually had two properties rented side by side in Kensington, the second one being for her studio. These rooms as well would become weekly gatherings, as I said, for artists, writers, actors, and other behemoths. I'd love to have been invited to one of those parties. I really would. How amazing. During this period as well, and this is kind of how the whole Golden Dawn thing starts to come into play, she developed a close friendship and mentorship with W.B. Yeats. And as she started to try and get into the world of publishing, she consulted him on sort of any kind of major editorial endeavours. She struggled. She really struggled. As a woman in a male-dominated world, she struggled to get her work published. It was proving difficult. She was having knockbacks after knockbacks. And some of her letters that were written at the time really illustrated her frustration from publishers. She actually referred to some publishers as pigs. So one letter said, "Pigs!" exclamation mark. The publishers are all pigs. Now, a lot of people could have, taken that knockback and, really sort of retreated, but not Pixie. What did she do? She became an editor herself of 2 literary magazines, and then eventually owning and operating her own press. I've just seen the time, guys, and I need to speed up, but I really don't want to not allow this to digest as well, but I don't want to run out of time. Pixie launched her own magazine in 1903, which was called The Green Sheaf. And again, there's lots of stuff in the book that refer to the Green Sheaf. She continued to consult with W.B. Yeats. The Green Sheaf later became the Green Sheaf Press, where she was publishing books and other printings. Printing materials, and that continued to 1906. However, what's notable here is that it was her mission to heavily promote the work of female writers and artists, and that was what she really wanted out of the Green Sheaf, and that was just a real testament to her character. So that took her to 1906, and for whatever reason, the Green Sheaf was no more. She then went back to the stage and she did a theatre production, a one-woman theatre production, retelling her Jamaican folk stories and reciting tales that appeared in the Anansi tales as well. That did really well, really well. She would have like little theatre sets around her with cutouts, little cutouts of characters, and she would sit and she would use this little theatre design whilst regaling the audiences with her tales. And she was so vibrant and funny, and people flocked to see her. The show even went to the US in 1907 and continued right through until 1909, doing these solo shows and using miniature theatre performances. I really need to read more about her. I know she's incredible. The work she did for women continued, though she was always championing the cause. In 1909, so much so, she became active in the suffrage movement. which was to encourage professional and non-professional artists, female artists, to submit their work, and they were paid a percentage of the profits, which is only right, isn't it? You know, it's incredible that that didn't happen. And you know, just like she did with the Green Sheaf, she was active in trying to make sure that suffrage movement was successful. All that aside, and all those talents, her greatest claim to fame has to be, today, the tarot. And I'll explain a little bit why it's her greatest claim to fame as I go on. And that's despite crowds, you know, flocking to see her through her Anansi stories. She described it as a big job for very little cash. What is incredible about the RWS Tarot for me is the fact that the deck was created 78, in fact there was a rumour to be 80, so it makes you wonder what other illustrations were done or wasn't used, or whether she did a couple. The deck was created from start to finish in 6 months. I mean, it's just incredible to think 78 pieces of art to be painted, created in 6 months. The original deck, when it was released in 1909, had the roses and lilies back, but the cardstock wasn't brilliant with this deck. So a year later, in 1910, the cracklebacks that we're used to seeing more now, in recent years, because the original Rider-Waite deck that still didn't credit Pixie still has the roses and lilies. It's other decks now, but even this, you know, the Tarot of 80 weight, it really infuriates me. So the original Lilies and Roses backs came in a 2-part box, and it was, you know, she finished the deck in November 1909, 6 months after starting it, and just 1 month later, in December 1909, the deck was published, which an amazing turnaround. We seem to be waiting forever these days, don't we, when we hear about decks and the whole publication process. And yes, so in 1910, we saw the Crackleback. So how did they meet? How did Pixie get to meet Arthur Edward Waite? Well, she joined the Isis Ukrainia Temple in 1901, when she settled in London. Through meeting Yeats and these people, she was introduced. And that was a temple of the Golden Dawn, the Isis Urania Temple. It's of the Golden Dawn, and that's when, you know, like I say, she was introduced by that circle of friends. It is unclear how invested she was, and she never progressed past the first degree, which is the Zelator level. So it was never clear just how initiated and how invested she was within the Golden Dawn. It's just known that she was there, and she was known within that organisation. However, in 1903, Pixie followed Waite and left the Isis Urania Temple when he created his own independent and rectified order of the Golden Dawn. Okay, so he created his own because he wanted a more Rosicrucian, I think that's how you say it, Rosicrucian, a Christian order. He wanted more of a Christian order than what the Isis Urania Temple offered. It is possible that this led to Pixie's conversion to Catholicism as well, which happened in 1911, just 2 years later. I want to read a quote from Arthur A. Waite, which he wrote in 1938 about her involvement with the tarot. He says, "It seemed to some of us in the circle there was a draftswoman amongst us who under proper guidance, so arrogant, could produce a tarot with an appeal in the world of art and a suggestion of significance behind the symbols which would put them on another construction. that had ever been dreamed of by those who, through many generations, had produced and used them for mere divinatory purposes. So he wanted to, you know, bring in a lot of symbology. And that said, you know, even though he was somebody who wanted more of a Christian element, you know, we have to remember that the RWS scaled back a lot of Christian imagery, with the papess becoming the high priestess and the pope or the high priest becoming the hierophant, etc. So even though there's a lot of Christian imagery in there, it was scaled back to its predecessors. As I said, there is a debate as to how much Pixie was spoon-fed during the creation of the deck and how much artistic control she had. But it is reported that Waite often dismissed her for not having a deep interest in the meanings or the mysteries and symbols with which he directed. So he did kind of dismiss her as being somebody who was an artist and didn't really go deep into the symbology of what was being created. What is clear, as I said, is that he had more control over the majors and Pixie had more control over the minors. And the Sola Busca is reported to, which, you know, was created in 1491 in Italy, is to have given some inspiration to Pixie's art that we see in the RWS. I mean, here we've got the, you know, that reminds me of the 9 of cups, not the 10, but you can see by looking at this, 2 of Wands staring out, etc., that there was some influence there. Oh my goodness, the time. Time is flying. So as I said, 6 months from April to October 1909, and it was released a year later. Okay, so in March 1919, this is going into her later life now. I just need to finish this bit off and we'll talk quickly about the RWS. She was left some funds by an uncle, Uncle Teddy, in New York, and she signed a lease on a property called, it was in Lizard, near Bude in Cornwall. And let me show you, hope it shows clearly. It's a beautiful house, look at that. Right on the tip of Cornwall by the sea. Here you'll notice a little chapel. That was Pixie who had that built as a devout Catholic at this time. Let me open the chat again so I don't miss that. And it was called Park Garland. And she took a lease, a long-term lease on it. It was a large house and she had a Catholic church, a chapel built on the grounds. She resurrected it and it was called the Lady of the Lizard. Our Lady of the Lizard, sorry. Lizard being the tip point of Cornwall. And she opened a summer resort home for Roman Catholic priests on the ground. She was eventually joined by her longtime friend, Nora Lake, who lived with her for many years. And I think this is where the rumours were around her sexual orientation. Again, nothing confirmed. She was there for more than 20 years. She left in 1939. Funds really started to dry up for Pamela. She was starting to hit financial difficulties. But she left with Nora, first to Exeter, where Nora had family, and then to Gorseland outside Bude in the early 1940s. She struggled to sell any of her work, and it was reported she didn't make a penny for a whole year. Pixie doubled her efforts at writing and illustrating books as she continued to paint during the 1940s. She also became a fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts in 1948. Pixie died in her apartment in Bude on the 18th of September 1951, and she was 73 years of age. She left her entire estate to Nora, but sadly, she had got many debts, many years of unpaid income tax, and even after all of her possessions were auctioned off, only 25% of her debts were paid, so Nora received nothing. And I think that is just so sad. A death certificate states she did have a Catholic burial, but she had no funds for a burial plot or a headstone. So it's highly probable that she has an unmarked grave in St. Michael's Cemetery in the Bude Anglican Parish Church. However, all burial records from this time were destroyed in a fire, so we don't know for certain. Although she was an active artist most of her life, her work had fallen into obscurity at the time of her death. Were it not for the continued popularity, okay, quite emotional, of this magical imagery that we have in the tarot, she would have been forgotten by millions of people. And oh, sorry guys, I just find it really emotional that this incredible person, you know, who did so much in her life could have been forgotten. But thank goodness we've got the tarot, and from that we were able to go into archives and records and just see, you know, the legacy. And this book is full of her amazing, amazing art. The RWS Tarot deck is the most well-known tarot deck in the world, and it's described as the first modern tarot deck. I did a poll, I've got a few minutes left, in the Facebook group, Hermit's Cave, asking people to say what their favourite system was. 83% said RWS, 8% Marseille. The difference, 83, 8% Marseille, Toth 6%, other 3%. The other being non-Marseille pips or things like Sforza, etc. I think, you know, it wouldn't be what it is without Pixie. We've got to be honest. It's, for me, it's her images. It's the way she illustrates those archetypes that speak to me. You know, they do have amazing details, backgrounds. They feature abundant symbolism. You know, they are toned down from overt Christianity. And I just think it's incredible that, you know, we now, after 100 years, are finally putting her name first, as it should be. I'm not going to mention copyright confusion. I don't have time for it, other than to say 70 years after her death in the UK and Europe, 1st of January 2022, then it becomes free, but it's different in the States and other places. So, guys, I've got 3 minutes left. There is just one thing I want to say before I end this. We have been talking about a woman who has been oppressed during her life, who was marginalised during her life, and whether the speculation about her being a woman of colour or a member of the LGBT plus community, you know, one thing is certain, she was a woman who had to fight. I am aware of what's happening in the world at the moment in the States, and I want to show my support to what is happening. She fought, she challenged, she changed the status quo in a lot of ways. This is 2020, and this should not be happening in this world today. What we're seeing currently in the US, it just really enrages me. I have to look at myself. I can do better. I can be a better ally. I need to try harder. And I need to look at ways in which I can do this. If there is anybody in our community who feels marginalised or underrepresented, talk to me, please. And that's all I have to say. My love and thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who's been affected right now. 2 minutes left, guys. I'm handing over to Kasia over at Tarot Map. I was going to show you a whole array of decks, how this has been copied so many times throughout the decades following Pamela Coleman Smith's work. There's too many to show. I've got like 40 here. It is so loved and it is so appreciated, and so is she. And I hope this has really helped you just to have a little bit of an insight into this incredible life. Thank you to everybody watching. Have a fantastic Tarathon. It is 1 minute to 11. Please hop over to Kasia at Tarot Map, link below, and I'll be with you for the next 23 hours. Have fun, guys, and thank you for everything you do. You're amazing. Take care.